We'll go ahead and call the special council meeting to order and turn it over to item 1 on the agenda. Are you going to read that out loud?
I can. Set term of office and start date for recently appointed associate municipal judges.
Now I move to set the term of office to 2 years for the associate municipal judges that were appointed at the council meeting on June 12, 2025. The term of office will begin July 1st, 2025, and run to June 30th, 2027.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second to set those terms as stated. Any discussion? Hearing none.
Terms now.
Yes, sir.
In 2 years.
All right, anything else?
Just a little detail.
We have somebody online.
And we have 4. We're good.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
I just looked over. I said 4.
But
Just
I didn't
didn't
start talking.
just a little bit of detail. Judge Jameson's term runs for 4 years, and these 2 judges would run for 2 years. That way, they're not all turning over at the same time. So we're staggering these terms and setting our ordinance doesn't give a specific start date. So if we can do that with this, you've done that with this motion and potential vote, then that will set that. We can later perhaps codify those term starts and end dates in the ordinance. So, but this is a temporary measure.
Thank you. All right, hearing no other discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, item 2, I guess we turn it over to Scott, Rhonda, or et al.
I will defer to Finance Director Moore here.
Good morning, everyone. We're fortunate to have our 2 experts. Theo DeVos is our bond attorney. David Cheatwood is online, and he is our financial advisor, and he has a presentation to explain further the financing alternatives and options regarding the public safety complex. David?
Great. Thanks, Rhonda. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to participate virtually here. I've got, as Rhonda said, a presentation that I can pull up. Rhonda, help me. Do the council members have that in person on their desk, or am I just sharing on my screen?
You're sharing your screen.
Okay, perfect. I'll pull that up and make sure everybody can see that. Bear with me. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So this morning, just wanted to talk through the financing options and provide you a little bit of detail when y'all are thinking about the project on hand here, which is a new police and fire headquarters building, along with a municipal court and a fleet kennel building. As y'all know, and what Frank's and Scott and Rhonda have been talking about, a new approximately 90,000 square foot building, 3 stories with police headquarters, courts facility, a 2-story fire department headquarters building, as well as a fleet service and kennel building, a parking deck, and some additional surface parking. Based on numbers y'all have received to date, some estimates you've received to date, estimated cost of the project is about $62 million. So when I've met with Frank and Scott and Rhonda, we've talked about how do we fund that? It's going to be coming from various sources. And so the initial plan would be to fund that from 4 different sources here. The first would be about $44.5 million from bond proceeds. And that's what's going to be the main focus of this morning's presentation. Looking at the town's unassigned general fund balance, you'll have a very healthy fund balance. You're in a very strong position. You may be able to carve out a couple of $1 million from that fund balance, still stay in a very good position there, and put that towards the project, that $2 million. You also have $10 million of funds that are still remaining from your limited obligation bond issue, where you pledged the tax increment revenues from the Midtown TIF back in 2022, just given some of the things that changed there, particularly with the road improvement project and some of the other funding that came in for that. Y'all got excess funds there that you can reallocate and put towards this project of approximately $10 million. And that leaves about $5.5 million remaining. Talking with Scott and Rhonda, y'all got various parcels of land you own that you may look at selling. If you could take $5.5 million from the proceeds of those sales, that could go towards the building. several of these are fungible. You can, when we talk about unassigned fund balance, sale of land proceeds, you can look at different numbers there, but that's just the initial proposed funding plan. This project, Scott or Frank, I don't know, would you anticipate an approximately 24-month construction schedule for this?
I think, David, we're scheduling sort of an 18-month.
Okay.
I'm sorry, there's Frank, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Roughly
18 months. And so, all of these proceeds don't have to be on hand on day one when you start moving dirt. Obviously, you want to have the full plan of finance laid out, but when we talk about the usage of unassigned fund balance or the sale of land, that's where that will likely come towards the end of that process. We'll have the bond proceeds in hand on the front end. And so out of the gate with the new bond issue getting 44.5 million, the existing bonds proceeds, the 10 million from your 2022 bonds, you've got about 55 million on hand to start. So you have a little bit of time to kind of play out the use of the fund balance versus the sale of land and using those proceeds, and do that more towards the back end of the construction cash flow schedule there. So with that initial or proposed breakdown, let's talk about this bond proceeds, which is the big part of it. So when you look at issuing debt in South Carolina, you'll have several different structures at your disposal here, but what we'll find is we'll quickly whittle this down to one proposed structure here, financing structure. So to start off, the simplest, easiest thing for entities to do is a general obligation bond. It is the lowest interest cost, most straightforward security structure where you're pledging your full faith, credit, and taxing power. The town has done that before. You have general obligation bonds outstanding right now. They've been refinanced over time. There's two ways to do general obligation bonds. You can do any amount as long as you get voter approval via referendum, or you can issue GO bonds without voter approval up to 8% of your assessed value. So looking at your June 30, 24 assessed value, your total debt capacity, so your capacity to issue additional GO bonds without voter approval, was about 18.9 million. If we take into account a principal payment you just made on those 2016 bonds earlier this year, that capacity increases to about 19 million. So very good capacity, does give you a lot of flexibility for certain types of projects, but when we're looking at trying to fund approximately 45 million with the borrowing, that's clearly not enough. And so for a GO bond perspective, assuming you don't want to go the referendum route, that is a longer, more involved process there to go through, and it's obviously subject to voter approval. And so if it gets voted down, that's in a little bit of a bind there. You can pivot to a different one, but just a more involved process. You don't have the capacity within your 8% debt limit right now to issue the full amount that you need for this project. And so that leads us to some other financing structures.
Hey,
lease purchase. Yes, sir.
Real quick question. The GO debt, that can only be paid back with general fund revenues, or can you use any other kind of revenue outside of the general fund?
You can use, let me start by talking about the security. When you issue those bonds, you are telling bondholders you will levy whatever millage is necessary to pay this back. That said, you can use non-property tax revenues to pay this back. So if you've identified other revenues to do that, you can absolutely do it, and that'll either lessen or eliminate the millage you would have to levy to pay that back. So it's the property tax pledge is the security, but you don't have to use property tax or other general fund revenues to pay it back.
All right, thank you.
Quickly, lease purchase agreements, those are just for vehicles and equipment, so would not apply here. I'll come back to installment purchase revenue bonds in a second. That's going to be our focus. Hospitality or accommodations fee revenue bonds in South Carolina, you can issue bonds that are secured by a pledge of those two fee streams. You've got a very strong hospitality fee, and you've got accommodations revenues as well. However, neither of those would be sufficient enough, and there's some limitations that come along with those, but those would not be sufficient enough to cover the full $45 million that we're looking at here. Done tax increment district bonds, You do have some capacity within the Midtown TIP to issue or at least repay some debt with tax increment revenues going forward, but it wouldn't be in the form of a tax increment revenue bond. And then you've got limited or special obligation bonds, which is a little bit of a combination where you're pledging a revenue stream and you have an appropriation backstop. The town has done that before with hospitality and your franchise fee. But talking through this with Scott and Rhonda and Frank, and also your bond counsel Theo, who's there with you, the installment purchase revenue bond structure is the ideal structure for this type of project. And that's the one we want to dive into a little bit more and talk through the process there. So with that, I'll move into a general overview. And Theo, I may prompt you as well to provide some additional detail on this. Installment purchase revenue bonds started 25 years ago, and really with school districts. They were the first to use those to fund large school projects when they didn't have enough 8% debt capacity and they didn't really want to go through the referendum process each time they needed to issue there. So it started with school districts. That said, the state legislature eliminated installment purchase revenue bonds as an option for school districts, but kept it for cities and counties. And so cities and counties are the ones that can do these installment purchase revenue bonds now. Under an installment purchase revenue bond structure, there is a separate party here. It is a single purpose, newly created not-for-profit corporation that would be formed. And then there's some interaction between the town and the corporation. So when we talk about the new complex specifically, the town would enter into a long-term base lease with this to-be-created corporation for the land on which the project's going to be constructed. The corporation is technically, or would technically be the issuer of the installment purchase revenue bonds, and then provide those proceeds to the town, those bond proceeds to the town to construct the project. What happens is the corporation in the town, let me go back to the land itself. The town enters into a base lease with the corporation, so leases over the land to the corporation itself. Then the corporation enters into a purchase and use agreement, sometimes called a facilities agreement, with the town that allows the town to use the facility. And under that, the town is going to make payments, regular payments to the corporation for its use of the facility. And with those payments, you are purchasing the complex in installments over time. The payments that the town makes to the corporation are going to match exactly what the corporation, as the issuer of the bonds, has to pay the bondholders. So the corporation, think of the corporation and this as the pass-through entity, the conduit entity here. They are the issuer of the bonds, but the town is the one that's making the debt service payments on the bonds. It's just in the form of an installment payment under a purchase and use agreement. So the town makes its payments to the corporation. The corporation in turn uses those payments to pay the bondholders. And with each purchase or with each payment that you make to the corporation, you are acquiring a percentage ownership in the new complex, such that when you make your last payment at the maturity of the bonds, the town then owns the building outright, and this construct falls away. Corporation goes away, don't need them anymore. Town owns the complex at the end of the repayment period, at the maturity of the bonds. Installment purchase revenue bonds, they are technically issued by the corporation, so they do not count against the town's 8% debt limit. That's one of the big advantages here. And the other big advantage is you are not pledging a specific revenue. You are not pledging your taxing power. You're not pledging hospitality revenues, for instance, or any other specific revenue. Instead, payments can be made from any legally available source of funds or a combination of funds, including millage, if you wanted to do that. And those payments are made by annual appropriation by town council each and every year during your budget process. So during your budget process coming up for fiscal 27, for instance, you would appropriate monies in a sufficient amount to make your payment, your installment payment for the upcoming fiscal year to the corporation. And then when you make those payments to the corporation, they in turn pass those on to the bondholders. So the benefits of this structure, again, this debt does not count against the town's 8% debt limit. You don't have to pledge any specific revenues, and you can pick and choose the different revenues that you use to make those payments. And those can change each and every year. You may have a plan laid out that says, here are the different revenue streams I'm going to use to make this payment. If one revenue stream starts to come in a lot stronger than another in future years, you can change that going forward. You're not boxed in terms of what your repayment sources are. It can be from any legally available funds. And the other benefit here is the credit rating. So you may ask, well, hey, if the town's not pledging any specific revenue from a bondholder perspective, what are they getting? Why would they do this? Well, the security that you're giving them is the collateral itself, is the complex. So if you all during this process do not make a payment to the corporation, and therefore the corporation, who does not have any other revenues of its own, can't make a payment to the bondholders, there will be a default because there's no payment there. And with a default, the bondholders via a trustee can come in and take ownership, take control, I should say control instead of ownership, take control of the facility that you have not, the entire facility if you haven't made any payments, but if you've made a certain amount of payments, they'll take over a portion of the complex that you have not acquired yet, and they can relet that to some other function. And so that's really the teeth behind this is a highly essential asset to the town. And therefore, you all are not going to be willing to lose access to all or part of the facility. That's the reason why you all as town council are going to budget each year to make these payments, because otherwise you would lose access to this highly essential facility. Given that structure, it gets rated typically one notch off of your general obligation bond rating. You'll have very high general obligation bond ratings, so this would be one notch off, gives you a very attractive interest rate. The couple drawbacks of this, it is a more complicated structure. There's this corporation to be formed, which Theo can talk about. There's just more paper, more documents involved, but it's a more complicated, but still a very common structure in South Carolina. Given that it's a little bit more complex, there is a higher cost of issuance. Theo, us, a couple of the other parties there, a little bit higher cost of issuance to go through this process. You do have to pledge an asset as collateral, but you have a great asset to pledge here. And it does come with a higher interest rate than a general obligation bond, estimated about 0.25 to 0.35% higher than a GO bond.
Name just a couple of other municipalities or counties in the state that have used this. There you go. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, good segue. I was going to show this and then maybe take questions here or let Theo jump in as well. But you'd be in very good company if you issue installment purchase revenue bonds. Just to highlight some of the other towns and cities across the state who have done these, and in many cases have done many series of these: City of Charleston, Columbia, Greenville, North Charleston, Rock Hill, Spartanburg, Anderson. And basically, every large city in South Carolina, for the most part, has done an installment purchase revenue bond. And that's because, again, it's going back to the benefits of it. When you don't have enough 8% capacity to fund a project, and you don't have enough of a pledged revenue stream or a single pledged revenue stream to cover it, and you want to use different revenues to repay it, and it's a good kind of hard asset, essential use asset, this is an ideal structure for it. We see it with counties as well. The large counties do this a lot. So you'd be in good company with this. This is a very common structure. But let me pause there, and maybe Theo, anything to add to that structure, or maybe talk through the corporation part of it?
Yeah, it's a good time to do that, David. I would add that Fort Mill, which is another smaller town that is rapidly growing near a major metropolitan area. They had the opportunity last year to buy the Springs textile complex in the middle of Fort Mill. So they required it. That's now their town hall and police. Very similar. This big building really neat architecture. So that's the building that died. And one of David's colleagues worked on that last year. A great project. Very similar to what I have to say. The corporation is described in law as an on behalf of issuer, meaning it issues on behalf of the town and only on behalf of the town in certain kind of projects. Been done enough in South Carolina Simplest way we found to do it is, town council identifies 3 to 5 people who would be directors of the corporation. Typically, you might have 1 or 5 person board, 1 or 2 town staff. And then what you're looking for is solid, upstanding citizens, because they really are involved in getting this thing off the ground. Once the bonds are issued, they step aside. They should meet once a month, say hello to each other. It really does very good work. The corporation delegates to the town responsibility for all the contracts, responsibility for keeping the facility, responsibility for upkeep, and a taxes in this case. We're calling it triple net. They get it built, then they step aside. At the end of the financing, the corporation organized under the South Carolina Nonprofit Corporation Act, but also under an IRS revenue ruling. So you'll hear these referred to as 20 corporations. They're very strong guardrails here, created with the consent of the town. They can only undertake projects that are approved by the town council. They can't do anything for any other local government. And they both agree that when the financing is paid off, the ownership of the property reverts to the town. So they're very limited in what they really carry out, which is create a little space that perhaps majority not being of the town staff. But other than that, they are doing town council wants them to do. If the town council is not happy, they can't do that. So, a member of my law firm, a corporate lawyer, has organized many of the ones you saw on the screen before, and also sit down with staff, they'll take their input and come up with the corporation. Thank you.
We did this back with the old failed hospital and the councils or.
Yeah. Just for litigation avoidance, you know. By the way, your school district here in town is one of the first in the state. Got an acronym called GROW. And I think those bonds will be paid off next year. So that's
These are volunteers, these volunteer members of the corporation.
what I've done is typically been retired school board or city council members, or people who may have been involved in the planning commission activities and stuff.
Can we pay these bonds off early?
David, how about it?
Yes. So the short answer is yes at the 10-year mark. And so and we'll lay this out here when we get into the repayment of this, but we're looking at a 30-year repayment term for these bonds, just given the size of it. And with a 30-year repayment term, you all would issue these bonds in the public market, which is when you prepare an offering document, you get the bonds rated, and you go out and sell it to a variety of different investors. In the public market, the typical prepayment provision is that you can't prepay it within the first 10 years, but at year 10 and any point going forward, you can prepay it, you can refinance it without penalty there. So yes, at 10 years, you have flexibility to prepay or refinance. Any other questions on the structure itself? And this is something where there is some time involved in putting the corporation together that Theo leads you through here. And so that's why we wanted to, we'll talk about the financing calendar itself in the back and in the different steps involved, but wanted to have this conversation with council this morning just to talk through the structure, answer any questions you have. so that if everyone's good with the structure, Theo can start the process with that. So we're in a position later this summer to really get going on the financing itself.
Do we need that by way of a vote?
It's not on the agenda.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
We'll get going if everybody smiles at me.
Mostly a citizen board then?
Citizens board?
I mean, it's citizens that serve on this board, not of the corporation, not so much as
The way I've done it is 2 citizens and 1 town staffer, or 5 board, 3 citizens and 2 town staffers.
so nobody on council serves. Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful.
But if you've got some council members who previously served, I'm sure they know that's keeping a hand in the night.
Do they carry any risk at all being on the corporation?
Well, at the outset, it's a great question. At the outset, the documents provide, town needs to buy all necessary insurance to cover. The risks are gonna be in the contract for development and construction, and that will be the town's risk. As far as tort liability, slip and fall or something like that, the town needs to buy enough insurance to cover that. One of the first things we do once the corporation is created and we pledge bond needs to be supplied to 501c3 status, federal tax and nonprofit corporation status. And once that letter from the IRS is in hand, under South Carolina law, directors of nonprofit corporations are immune from tort liability.
NGW, that last board went through everything that could be done. We were posting, we were shooting every day we could see it.
It looks like the payments will be around $2,800,000 a year, is that right?
Yeah, you're jumping ahead.
Yeah, I can get into, if y'all are ready, I can get into the repayment of the debt. I know we always start with, there's 2 questions when you're looking at financing. What is the optimal structure? And then how do you pay it back? What are the revenues to pay it back? So what we've covered so far is the optimal structure, and we can shift into the repayment sources if y'all are ready for that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's start big picture here. If we are looking to fund approximately $44.5 million from these bond proceeds to be used with the other sources we just talked about to fund a $62 million project, and we looked at a 30-year repayment term, you'll see that it starts off, it's a little bit lumpy to start, and then it tails off here on the back end. And there's a reason for that, because we're looking at different repayment sources. But this is what it would look like in the aggregate. You know, right now in terms of a financing schedule, we're looking at closing on the financing at the end of the year in mid-December. So closing means funds in the bank. So that would be by year end. In the public market, you all issue, you pay interest on the bonds semi-annually every 6 months, and then you pay principal once a year. And you can set those payment dates. And so we've set these payment dates to be 9/1 of 26 would be your first interest payment. You'd also pay principal then as well. And then from an interest standpoint going forward, you'd pay the subsequent March 1 of 27, September, et cetera. And then principal September 1 of each year. So no payments, no out of pocket in fiscal 26. Your first payments that would need to be budgeted would be for fiscal 27. And we've assumed a 30-year repayment term just to help with some of the lower annual payments there, which would take us out to 2055. So in fiscal 27, based on the estimated interest rates from about a month ago when we ran these, your fiscal 27 payments would be about 2.8 million for fiscal 28 as well. And then it's about $3.2 million per year through 2043, and then falls off to 1.9 million per year. So why does it look like that? Well, let's look at the different repayment sources that we're focused on. The first is accommodations tax revenues. So based on fiscal 25 estimates, the town anticipates collecting about 440,000 of accommodations tax revenues. You don't want to use necessarily all of that, and this is the case with several of these revenue sources, but y'all don't pay too much out of that, the A-tax revenues. If we set aside about $15,000 just for minimal operating expenses or a small capital project, and if we basically allocated 425,000 of that 440, so admittedly using the bulk of your A-tax revenues, how much would that support over a 30-year time period? So that $425,000 per year would support about $6.5 million in debt for this project. And so what I'm doing here is carving out little pieces that gets to that aggregated total. But if you use 425,000 per year of A-tax revenue, that would raise $6.5 million towards that project. Now, yes.
Let me make sure everybody's clear. David here is talking about the local accommodations tax, not
right.
state accommodations tax. This is the local only, which is the one that you levy and that you control through state law, not the state A-tax that we just met on yesterday that is controlled in terms of its spending in large part by state law, and we don't have much choice. So this is the local A-tax if you're talking to people who get funding from the state A-tax. This is not the state A-tax.
Good clarification. Thanks, Scott. So, and this is, oh, sorry.
No question.
The state A-tax is the one that we issue to our local.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
We're good.
Great. So with the accommodations tax, and this will be the case with the hospitality fee as well that we'll cover next, there are limitations on what you can use those state limitations on what you can use those revenues for. So, technically speaking, you may not be able to use this 425,000 to pay debt service, but the way you would still be able to capture this revenue is, allocate 425,000 of A-tax to cover certain general fund expenditures, which you'd be permitted to do. That in turn frees up general fund revenues in a like amount that you use to pay debt service. So we're getting to the same point here, but again, technically, Theo would tell you, you probably can't use accommodations tax directly for this project, but you can use it for other general fund expenses, which frees up that revenue. So that's the first part of that. That covers $6.5 million. Next up, hospitality tax revenues. And so based on fiscal 25 estimates, you'll collect about $6 million of hospitality tax revenues. We do want to you'll pay a fair amount of operating expenses out of hospitality tax. You also have existing debt service that you pay out of your hospitality tax, and you do kind of larger capital projects as well. So looking at all of those, it looks like you would have about $440,000 of available, that should say hospitality instead of accommodations, hospitality tax revenues. So what we would look at is not using up every penny of projected available revenues. Let's use half of those. So let's just do 220,000 of hospitality tax revenues. How much debt would that support? And the answer is about $3.2 million from hospitality tax revenues. It would function the same way as the accommodations tax. You wouldn't use it directly to pay the debt service. You're using it to cover additional general fund expenditures, which you're permitted to do. That in turn frees up general fund expenditures to pay this debt service, general fund revenues to pay this debt service.
David, let me make one comment for the council. The hospitality tax is one of the few revenues that has consistently grown over time. And that's true across the state based on my observations and conversations with people. So where we may be sacrificing, if you will, some hospitality tax that is funding like some of the parks and recreation activities, the hope would be that it would continue to grow as it has historically, so as to potentially close that gap and allow us to continue to fund parks and rec, for instance, the way we have. But initially, Parks and Rec might not get as much as it has previously. So.
Yeah, and I was also going to note, Scott, the existing debt service that you're paying on your hospitality bonds, that is going to mature in about 10 years or so. And so when that matures, that frees up a large portion of your hospitality tax that would be available for other uses at that point in time.
Okay, we have a question in the room.
Well, just for you guys, like what is the plan for covering other needed expenses that we use these funds for, like we use these funds for purchasing these cars and six and fire trucks. We use these funds already for a lot of things. Safety needs and accounting. So what would then how would we then pay those and everything?
We're not proposing to, decrease, certainly consider it. Hopefully it'll grow enough that we can access this without cutting very much out of there.
But that will ultimately fall on y'all to determine what our priorities are, and fund those as you see.
Because this payment begins in 2027, and it's accounting for such a bit of those funds now. I mean, I can see it growing over time, but it wouldn't grow that much like right away. 27, maybe now 30. Is it going to put us in a place where like we stop doing the millage rate increase because that's the only way we're going to be able to pay for what we need for these necessities?
So out of our roughly $6 million in revenue, I'm looking at 220,000 as the revenue that we would potentially designate from hospitality to fund a portion of this debt.
Just for hospitality, but with that, accommodation.
Right, so we don't have any regular expenses that comes out of accommodations tax at this point. And I feel like we've got 220 that's extra in hospitality that won't really cut into any of our existing spending that I'm aware of.
They're like right now, when we get through finance or something and we were purchasing new these vehicles or something like that, we sometimes will, and I'll ask, or sometimes it'll show where it's coming from. It'll show hospitality sometimes, it'll show accommodation sometimes. That's like you're already paying for all of that.
Well, no, I mean, we have a capital fund now, and hopefully our capital expenditures can flow through there. If we have excess and there's a reason that hospitality can't go accommodation for purchase of capital assets, then that's a decision that we would present and made at this point. I'm not really, there's not any real plans to fund significant amount of police cars or anything out of hospitality.
And we do take a portion of that and put it on general fund balance as well.
We do.
So you think that would still be, if we need our general fund balance, of course, the area, right? You think that would still be able to continue?
So yeah, so as a practical matter, what will happen is, I think we're doing 3.7 million in this year for transfer from hospitality to general fund. We would really do 3.9 million is what we would do as a practical matter. We would then have extra spending of that $200,000 extra revenue, which will be designated to debt service that will fund this $3 million worth of debt, a piece of it. And all these pieces that, and David will probably explain this too, but all these pieces are what we're estimating right now. The whole composition of it could change in 2 years, where we do a lot more out of hospitality, less out of accommodations. If all the components can actually change.
The funding streams are flexible. Flexibility built in. They, as much or as little from a variety of different funding streams is what is one of the attractive pieces of this funding structure.
I think, not to speak for you, but I think what you're getting at is, while you are presenting these as options, you're also contemplating how to support all of the town's functions at the same time, is really what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
You're presenting options, but you're not leaving us in a position where we can't function as a
And
town.
I think Rhonda's done a very conservative estimate on all these too.
Agreed.
Okay.
But I just want, maybe I kind of started, I started this conversation maybe in the wrong way. But I just want y'all to be aware that, you know, any changes in these revenues are, when we get going here, we have to make this debt payment. So that if we ever get into a position, we don't expect to, and we're planning not to, but if we ever do get into a position where you're gonna have to prioritize, then this is gonna be priority number one. And that may mean something else won't get funded or won't be as fully funded as we want it to be. So just want you to understand, this is payment number one. Well, you're back, it may not be, it's payment number one, but it's on the same level with all the other debt payments that we're having.
I wanted to say that.
Yeah.
Basically, you know,
This is one of several of our mortgage payments that we're gonna be, that we have to make.
We gotta eat ramen noodles.
That's right.
Or
We pay more-
years, or years.
Right, yeah.
I have not contemplated cutting any current expenditures that we have in the budget to come up with these revenue numbers that I think are possibly available for this funding plan. Does that make sense?
Are you reducing our fund balance out of that?
Only, we put in $2 million.
Every year?
No, just one time.
Just one time. And that can change too. I mean, obviously, the cost of the building is a fluid number at this point too. I mean, we think we have a handle on it, but it's fluid. So there's a lots of small adjustments. I feel like there's small adjustments, you know, according to the big picture, that makes this work. Does that sound right, David, Theo? Anything on this?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is our plan of finance based on the estimated 62 million, and really looking at, you know, we start with non-debt sources of funding, and that's where we came up with a little bit of unassigned general fund balance, potentially some proceeds from land sales, your existing debt that's on hand, proceeds of existing debt that's on hand, and then what's left, the 44.5 million, and then how do we fund that? To Rhonda's point, the question was not cutting any services, not taking any money away from anything else that the town's currently doing, but what's available? What can we use for this? And that's where we're looking at the little bit of hospitality, a little bit of accommodations, and then just to preview the next couple slides, impact fees and additional tax increment revenues are the other two sources that we'll go through.
Keep going, David.
Okay. So we're chipping away at that 44.5 million. We have the 6.5 from accommodations tax revenue, 3.2 million from hospitality tax. A big portion here, impact fee revenue. So you'll have impact fees currently in place, and you anticipate the following amounts coming from police, fire, and municipal court related impact fees. So from fire, about 1.8 annually, and then from municipal impact fees, about 1.2 annually. So under state statutes, and Theo can talk more about this, you can use impact fees to fund the cost of new or expanded facilities for the purposes for which the impact fee was imposed. Looking at the additional square feet of the new facility for the police, fire, and court aspects of it, current estimate is that you could allocate about 1.3 million of that 3 million in total of impact fee, projected impact fee revenue. So allocate about $1.3 million per year to pay that back. So like the other analysis, if we look at $1.3 million per year, how much debt can that raise? And the answer is about $20 million based on current interest rates. Now, this one is the biggest, you know, your revenue streams, your hospitality and accommodations tax revenue streams are growing, and they're fairly consistent. Y'all are in a great area, a lot of growth. And so you're seeing that grow year over year. And that's a fairly steady revenue stream. Yes, it can be impacted by changes in the economy, but generally speaking, fairly steady. Impact fees is admittedly a more volatile revenue stream. Again, things are going great in and around the town. So near-term projections look very good for that revenue stream going forward. But when we're talking about 30-year debt, who knows what this is going to look like 10 years from now, 20, 30 years. And so what we wanted to do is just note, again, we're not pledging this revenue stream, so you can pull from different revenue streams in a given year if, for instance, impact fees are not coming in as projected, or if hospitality fees are coming in a lot stronger than projected. You can change this year to year. But just to give you an idea, if impact fees went away or didn't materialize in a given year, let's say you had a year with no impact fee revenue, as unlikely as that may seem, what does $1.3 million mean in terms of your millage rate? And so looking at your current value of a mill of about 330,000, if you all did not have any other revenue sources available to pay this back, no impact fee revenue coming in, you needed to raise 1.3 million, that would be about 3.9 mills in a given year based on your current value of the mill to pay this back. This is, worst case scenario. Like I said, no other revenue streams available. You've got to pay the debt back, as Scott's talked about. What's the fallback? And that would be, you could increase your property tax rate by 3.9 mills. That will raise $1.3 million in a given year. So wanted to kind of give you that worst case scenario specifically with impact fee revenues, given that it can be volatile year to year.
David, in our last financial report, we have, our revenue year to date is 2.9 million between fire and municipal. So obviously there is a risk that will continue at that level, but that gives us a good margin. 1.3.
Yeah. So again, just using 1.3 million of that 2.9 you said, or 3 million, Rhonda.
Would we issue for something like the purchase of fire trucks, because there would be 400,000 left in fire, so that obviously would be enough for fire trucks. Would we issue then a general obligation bond for the purchase of fire trucks?
So replacement of fire trucks not eligible for this funding from this fund, but a new station fire truck would be. And so I think that's one of the things that we would look at. Hopefully, we could do it on lease purchase and fund the general fund, but we also could fund that impact fee, depending on what the numbers kind of look like.
The new fire station that we are building, we're funding that out of the 2.8 million. Or a portion of
We have done a portion of that.
because we have to build that, if I understand it, that right?
I haven't looked in planning to have this year.
At some point, we'll have to build Station 7, yes. And impact fee, the leftover impact fee revenue would be where we would turn first to finance it. And if that's not sufficient, then we have to look at other potential revenue sources, including GOF.
And roughly, can you give me a price per million of a payment on a general obligation bond that costs us annually? Are you or just to start to try to figure out what I know it looks like in additional, but
In the current interest rate environment, David, do you have that handy on a payment per million on a geo debt?
Yes, I will say it depends on how long the repayment term is. Are we paying that back over 10 years, 20, 30 years? But is the question, and bear with me 1 second, you may have to see some of my other files here. Why I've got a little handy sheet I pull up just to look at. If you borrowed $10 million, or let's just say $1 million, that's 100,000 over 10 years. Right now, at a geo bond of a 4% interest rate, you're paying about $125,000 per year for each $1 million that you borrow, assuming it's a 10-year payback. Does that help address the question? I'm happy to look at other, extend that to 20 years, for instance. If you borrow $1 million, for every $1 million you borrow and pay it back over a 20-year period, it's about $75,000 per year.
and over like in the past, it's like those ones were issued like 10, 15 years. The ones that you and I talked about before,
I don't recall any.
or the lease we've done these purchases.
We don't purchase it, yeah.
But not the general
Yeah.
function, so.
Yeah, I'm sure they financed the fire station at some point, but we haven't.
Yeah,
Haven't that I know about.
because we would have,
That's my city.
like, we would have to, I mean, we would have to finance that. It seems. I mean, would y'all agree that? we would have to-
Any significant amount,
Yeah.
we're gonna have
Because those
to
are
finance.
huge.
The structure and then the equipment,
Right.
yeah, it's gonna be way more than we would have cash on hand. Keep going, David.
Okay. So our fourth and final identified repayment source would be additional tax increment revenues within your Midtown tax increment district. As y'all know, that was created back in 2022. A baseline value for all the taxable property located in the boundaries of the TIF district was set at about 12.4 million. You've got the town is fully participating in this for a 25-year term, as is the county. The school district is participating, but at a lesser degree. They have agreed to contribute up to $1 million per year for a 20-year period, so through fiscal year 2042. Y'all have seen significant growth. While really one of the driving developments within the tax increment district was the sawmill development, y'all have seen significant growth outside of that over the first couple of years of this TIF district. You see here in fiscal 23, a 3.5% growth in that total assessed value. In fiscal 24, about 12%, and then a big jump last year. I guess we're still in this year, 25%. That's driven from the reassessment year, but really significant growth before the sawmill development really starts to hit this, which is great news. As y'all also know, you've issued $20 million. You did that back in 2022, originally to fund a couple of projects, particularly the road improvement project. Going back to our initial discussion at the outset of this presentation, you've got $10 million in that project fund still remaining, just given the other funding sources that came in for the road project. So you've got $10 million from those 2022 bonds that you can put towards this project. But on a going forward basis, there's projected to be additional tax increment revenue available that you can put towards the new complex. So when we built a model, I know I've presented this to council in the past, we built a model for the TIF district looking at different assumptions. The driving assumption, as I said, is the sawmill development itself. So we reached out, or Frank reached out to the developer to get some updates on timing for the different components of that development. And so this has been updated very recently just with his estimates. The driving forces here of what the potential tax increment revenue will be or could be, or for each of these projects identified, when will it be completed or placed in service, what calendar year, and then what's the estimated development cost or assessed value of that. So you'll see, the big part of this development is the apartment complex. Based on the latest from the sawmill developer, they expect to complete that, place it in service next calendar year, 2026. That means starting in your fiscal year 28, you will start to receive tax revenues from that development. If it's done by, December 31st of 2026, they get a tax bill in the fall of 27. They pay those taxes by, let's say, January 28. That's your fiscal year 28. That's how that year in service versus assessed value impact works. You'll see the different development cost out there. That's based on their estimates. We've been and always have been discounting that, just not knowing if it will get assessed at exactly that amount, or the taxable value will be the same as the development costs, I should say. So we have a discounted cost. These are all 6% properties. And so looking at this, the various components of this development, it looks to add about $9.1 million in assessed value over the next couple of years. A little bit starting in fiscal 27 in connection with the convenience store that would be done at the end of this year, but most of it would be in your fiscal year 28 and 29, given that these projects would be completed during calendar year 26 and 27. So that's a big driver of projected tax increment revenues. So still some variables in play. Those projects have to get completed, placed in service, and hopefully assessed at something close to what is being projected there. But in addition, outside of just Sawmill, like we just described on the previous page, y'all are getting growth elsewhere in the district. The model has always assumed what has proved to be a very conservative growth rate of that area outside of Sawmill of a 2% annual growth. And you can see, again, you've been well above that, even if you take out the noise with the reassessment year. So based on those assumptions, I want to walk you through projected available tax increment revenues. And so these would be the revenues that are available, the projected incremental revenues available based on all of those assumptions I just went through on the new development coming in. You have existing debt service from the 2022 issuance that you have to pay back. It's about $1 million a year for the next 2 years, and then it jumps up to 1.8 million. That was by design. When the town issued those bonds back in 2022, it was again based largely on when the Sawmill development components would be completed. So we stepped it up in fiscal 28, thinking, planning for the completion of certain projects. So that's the reason for the step up in your existing debt service. So what does that leave you going forward? And we're really focused on, fiscal 27 and beyond. So you all have, or projected to have, available incremental revenues after you pay the debt service on the 2022 bonds. So that's what we're using to size, this component of the larger installment purchase revenue bond that would be funded from the tax increment revenues. And so we're able to kind of match our debt service to available revenues with one caveat. They did move, the Sawmill developer in their latest update moved particularly the apartment building back a year. That kind of kicked out some of the available revenues. And so we have a little bit of a shortfall in what would be your fiscal year 2028. That's the only pinch point based on these assumptions of about $535,000. But outside of that, if we look at the available revenues going forward, how much can that fund? And the answer is $15 million. And so using just this revenue stream of projected incremental revenues, that would raise about $15 million. So kind of going back through this, we've got 15 million that would be repaid from tax increment revenues, 20 million that would come from impact fee revenues, 3.2 million from hospitality tax, and 6.5 million from accommodations tax. That is the plan kind of as we sit today, as we've talked about a number of times throughout this presentation. That can certainly change, and you have flexibility to change it going forward. But that's how we're looking at those projected tax increment revenues available. Any questions on that piece of it? And sorry, this kind of goes back to our first, you'll see for the tax increment piece, I'm really just taking it out to when the school district's portion, their contribution ends. That's aligned with the structure of your 2022 bonds that were issued. So given that I'm really condensing or paying this TIF portion back over the next 17 years, while the other pieces I'm doing 30-year repayment, going back to my initial slide in the aggregate, that's the reason why it's a little bit lumpy here. It looks lumpy. You'll see it's heavier, larger payments through fiscal year 2043. That's because of the tax increment revenue piece is focused entirely in that year, whereas all the other pieces are over a 30-year time period.
Since this is a town-wide facility, if we needed to, can we tap the overflow TIF?
Well, that's the that's the county's TIF, right?
Yeah.
That would be a conversation you'd have to have with the county on if there's any available revenues that could go towards that. I don't know how that fits within their. I'm sure that wasn't contemplated in their redevelopment plan when that was proposed. Not that that can't be revised, but I may it would of course involve conversations with the county. I don't know, Theo, is there any legal reason if
That would take two things. The county council would have to make a public finding by resolution. That facility benefits property. And they would have, that would be a major modification. Assuming in their current TIF plan, it doesn't say build a fire police and court facility for the town of Summerlin. That's in there. But if it's not, they really go through a procedure that looks like it started over. So I can see that now. Yeah. That are there.
If looking at the Midtown TIF projections, that as far as the repayment sources, we're talking about the excess revenues after debt service. Is that projection based on just on the 2% growth outside of Sawmill?
that's correct, and that's a really good point. So it's just based on 2% outside of Sawmill plus Sawmill. That's what is driving the projected revenues. Those are the assumptions behind that. So if y'all come in much stronger outside of that, then you will have additional excess revenues because of that.
We can assume it's pretty conservative. Midtown TIF repayment, not in that portion of it is pretty conservative.
Yes, I've been very impressed with the growth that we've seen over the last couple of years in this TIF district, which don't have anything to do directly with Sawmill.
The 20-year, have you looked on average over 20 years, what has that been? But what has been our growth over the past 20 years? Average
Richard, to your question, 500 North Main. That would all be taxable under the plans that they have now. And it's in the TIF district.
I mean, there's a lot of it there. I think the growth is occurred over the east side and the west side of Sunnyvale. There's a lot more. So I guess so.
Well,
There's a lot of reference, but
Yeah.
I think we all would say that.
it's been a long path to get to this point. We certainly have a clear, identified need. It's been studied. We've studied it, doing it on a separate piece of property, phasing it, using the existing property, adding to it, and doing something differently. We've, I think, narrowed down on exactly what our need is, okay? Right, through a long process. Now, if we, as a body, took action in 2018, 19, when we did our first study, we'd be looking at $20 million less based on their projections then. And I know that delaying the inevitable is only going to cost us more money. My question is, while we have our subject matter experts, David and Theo, I want to know, you know our books, you know the size of our town, you've looked at all the math. Do you see this as a responsible move for our town to meet this need?
Yeah, I'll start. As you noted, this is a highly essential complex. It is a need. It's not a want. Y'all have been studying this for a number of years, and to your point, and I've seen this many times over, things are not getting cheaper. And so if you wait and we look at this in a couple of years from now, highly likely it's a larger amount and you're trying to find other funding sources for it. So I think starting from just the standpoint of this is a need, that's a big one. And then when we look at the amount of debt that you'd issue, 45 million, yes, that's a large amount of debt, but you're a large city, you have a lot of revenues coming in. You all can support this, looking at kind of where you stand now and going through this with Rhonda and the available sources you have, you all can pay that debt back. And so, I don't typically get too focused on the amount of the debt as long as the repayment sources are there to pay it back and we're comfortable with it. Admittedly, a couple of these repayment sources, particularly the impact fee, that's to me the biggest wild card there, because you don't know what that's going to look like many years from now. I think you have a pretty good feel, a pretty good comfort level over the next several years. Things are going very well. Impact fee revenue is coming in very strong. But when we're talking about 30-year debt, a lot can change over time. So that's the one variable. But again, we're not planning on using all of your impact fee revenue, just a portion of it. Feel really good about your accommodations and hospitality revenue. And then on the tax increment district revenue, kind of each year that goes by, you feel better and better about that. We've now got a 3-year history and things are going very well with that. The sawmill development, yeah, it's gone a little bit slower than maybe anticipated back in 2022, but things are going, that's going to happen. And once that's done over the next couple of years, I mean, that, I don't want to say it locks in your tax increment revenue, because, I guess it can always get reassessed lower in a given year. But once that development is done, I think that revenue stream is very solid. And so that, again, just leaves the impact fee standpoint. But no, I mean, I think, I don't think y'all are getting in over your heads on this. You're a large town in a booming area. You have a need and you have repayment sources identified and available. And with this structure, it gives you flexibility to look at different, if you have a down year, you can pull from other available revenues. You can, in a worst case scenario, like I said, you can raise property tax if you needed to in a given year. You can use fund balance in a given year if you needed to, if it was just a hiccup and not a trend. So y'all got a lot of flexibility with it.
Look at me. I could tell you how this fits in with what gets done in the state. I cannot give you financial advice under a law adopted by Congress. I'm forbidden from doing that. So I hope the AI gets that. I can't give you financial advice. This is done a lot of places. I'm the kind of guy who wakes up at 4 and thinks about the worst possible outcome. The worst possible outcome here is that you would need to use general obligation bonds every year to pay it. You've got the ability to do that. I probably won't wake up too much. You just need to understand all the school district deals that got done in South Carolina, $6 billion or so. Those payments, maybe a few exceptions, those payments are made in the issuance of bonds every year by the school district. And former Speaker of the House across the way, in fact, said, well, you're just leveraging your debt. You've got a limited source, but you can use it and repay it and use it and repay it. You can get to where you want to. So, not financial advice, but I don't feel we're getting into something that if everything else goes bad, you still can't keep your facility.
Well, I appreciate that. Through all this study and listening, I feel like, and this is based on what I understand, we are taking a path that hasn't necessarily been done well by our previous councils of doing it right in the most efficient and cost-effective manner for a long duration. We're actually planning for the future and doing it right one time, which is going to be cheaper, and we're not going to have to discuss this for some time because of that. So anyway, I just want to say thank everybody for your expertise in helping us plot this course.
One thing I wanted to mention too, when you saw the TIF revenues and repayment over more like 17 years, that's actually forcing us into a smaller term as far as repayment. So our interest cost is really less than what it would be on a traditional 25 to 30 year financing structure. So it's forcing us into that. So I think that's a good news.
Is that more good news, Mark?
Yeah.
Make sure.
You know, when you have your car's gonna last 10 years and you finance it over 4, you're in
Yeah,
good
that's
shape.
right. That's right. I don't think everybody answered as well, but, and to answer your question earlier, I think it'd be irresponsible for us not to take action on this one better. That's all plan in front of us to, according to our financial advisor and group experts, basically, So this, we are not in a bad spot by doing this. And I think it would be good possibly scan down the road, further down the road, what we are people. Can't stop more out.
Yes, sir. Our revenue projections are conservative, and I appreciate that. Is the cost of the building also conservative? What happens if this thing comes in at 72 million?
So right now, we've actually started to get some of the quotes in, and they're looking really good. So we don't expect that to happen. We're actually right at budget. I hate to say it out loud.
We're not gonna hold you.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
give
just
us
gonna say, we're looking right on budget. I'll say, so, we're hoping
So
for better.
62 is based on real numbers, not
Yes.
just
Yes. Yeah.
the architect.
Yeah.
Architects
No, no.
and engineers are
So, yeah.
historically not good at that.
Yeah, well,
Tell us about it.
well, they weren't the ones that provided it. It was from builders and developers. We put it out to the right.
Frank, do you still expect to get the guaranteed maximum price or to receive that in the next few weeks?
We'll have not the guarantee, we'll probably have the guarantee right before October. We'll have one number in the next couple of weeks, but we won't have the guaranteed number.
Okay.
Now, I'll add, Frank and chiefs and the judge are all aware that if we're gonna miss our target budget-wise, then there may have to be changes made to the designs and plans to account for that. So they're on notice of that, they're aware of it, and they are partners. I don't know that they're necessarily willing partners in some cases, but they are partners to make sure that we stay at that number.
Well, I don't want to value engineer this building so much that it doesn't fit
Sure.
the needs of
course.
the mission that we're trying to accomplish.
But when you're talking about things that, as a for instance, finishes, I suggested to Frank the other day, hey, let's just have finished concrete floors. Those could be nice. That may seem like a small amount of money, but those kinds of things add up if we have to do that. But they have an eye towards that right now.
Quash did the concrete and then ground it, and it was like granite.
Yeah, we'll be
But
looking.
it's slippery as all get out.
Yeah.
Ms. Rhonda, did we have any other items of
David,
discussion?
David, you want to go with
the calendar. We'll
Our
go.
calendar.
Yeah. Let's talk about next steps here. And so I think, as I mentioned earlier, part of the rationale for having this discussion now, even though we're not looking at closing on the financing until December, is really the formation of the corporation. And so wanted to make sure y'all understood the installment purchase revenue bond structure and the steps involved there to go down that road. And so with this discussion, what we planned on is over the next 2 months, allowing Theo and his partner to form the corporation, identify with the help of the town, the directors that would be appointed there. So we've got that happening by the end of August. So approximately 2 months to get that together. In terms, and at that point, starting in early September, it's typically for these financings of these types, 3 to 4 months to get this going. And so we'd really kick this off in earnest in early September. From an approval standpoint, requires 2 readings of an ordinance by town council. So we would target your September 11th meeting as well as your October 9th meeting for those. Once that corporation is formed, we'd also have a similar conversation like this, particularly on the structure. These directors may have questions about, for instance, as one of you all asked, what's my liability? Why would I have this? Or why would I do this? What's the structure here? So we can have review a structure, review the plan of finance with them as well. And then maybe that occurs on September 11th or around that time period. But we want to have that discussion with them, make sure they're comfortable, because the corporation, as the issuer of the bonds, has to adopt a resolution as well. And so we would target that resolution by the corporation for the October 9th, or set that meeting for October 9th as well to coincide with the town council meeting. Doesn't have to coincide with town council meeting. It can be at another date, but just for simplicity, have it on the same date. During the months of,
We'll have the corporation meet and approve the town council. Reading the corporation's ready to
Any benefit in moving this timeline up to special council meetings?
It certainly can be moved up some. We've targeted, going back to my question to Frank in terms of the final GMP, it sounded like around October. And so when we look at closing money in the bank based on this schedule, you'd have that in hand December 10th. If y'all need it earlier, yes, we can start earlier. But that's just kind of based on when that final GMP would be determined and when you.
That's 3-month schedule for getting all your financing documents together.
Yeah.
Used by us, the town. The corporation, if you're not retaining an underwriter, like this stuff, bonds, they'll bring in their accounts. So there's a lot of back and forth on these deals. And so you're dealing not only with staff and us, but schedules of other people who are not aligned.
You've got the documentation process, the bond documents, including that base lease, the facilities agreement, and then you have the offering document that I mentioned that's called a preliminary official statement. The town has done those in the past with its offerings, prior financings. So that is prepared. We go and get these bonds rated by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. Those are the two agencies that the town currently has ratings from on its general obligation bonds, and they have ratings from Standard & Poor's on its two limited obligation bonds for the hospitality and franchise fee borrowings. We will get those ratings in hand. Those ratings come in towards the tail end of the financing process. Once those are in hand, we post the preliminary official statement, which means it is sent out to all the different investors out there. The underwriter that Theo mentioned, that would be the investment banking firm that is hired to go out and sell the bonds to a variety of different investors. That would happen, that sale happens on a specific day. Right now, we're targeting November 20th. When you go out and sell those bonds on that day, that's when your interest rates are locked in. So these numbers I've been running are based on estimated interest rates. Rates are going to continue to fluctuate daily up until the point in time where you lock those rates in, which on this schedule would be November 20th. And then you close typically 2 to 3 weeks later. There's that pre-closing period where Theo drafts various closing documents and certificates that are signed by the mayor and others. But that's what that couple-week period after pricing involves. But we can, as if anything changes in terms of timing of the GMP, we can accelerate a little bit, and we can certainly push back if there's any hangups along the way as well.
Thank you.
Do you know our 2015 and 2016 debt service is an obligation for other 300 or something thousand or something, 400 something thousand in 2015? Do you know when that ends, those payments on those?
I was thinking, maybe we looked at that. I was thinking, that we had 10 years.
Yeah, bear with me. I should have had this pulled up, but I have your debt profile just to show you your different, the current debt you have outstanding. So right now you've got your 2016 bonds. Those go away on in your fiscal year 2037. And then your hospitality bond, which is again is another identified source, that'll go away in your fiscal year 2036. So, you've got about 10 years or so with that debt once you issue this new one. And when those fall away, again, creates capacity if you needed it to supplement some of these other revenue streams, or if any of those other revenue streams are not as sufficient or not coming in as projected, I should say. You've got the ability to redirect revenues that were going to these bonds to the new debt.
Those lease purchases, it looks like in 26 and 31. Right?
Yes, so that will be,
We have a limit on how much lease purchase we are allowed to.
Not for equipment.
My concern is not paying this back. I do think that it was a great explanation. Thank you so much. And that's the impact. My concern would be the things that we do need to, the capital, the big thing. Future. fire trucks, fire stations, police cars, whatever else we come across in the town, maybe equipment. And how often are we going to continue to be able to take the money and put into a capital fund like we did this year? How are we gonna be able to continue to do that? And even if we can, that's not gonna be near enough to fund these other things that they will need. And so, and I also think cuts out some of the road projects. Obviously, we're trying to get funding from other places for those. So, really, this would be our capital project. Really, everything else would need to maybe, wait 10 years till one of those expire, or we get another general obligation bond that we're just steadily increasing the debt. If we have this debt, that already incurred debt, and then even more debt. That's my concern. I think this is great and we need to move forward. But I think our council should probably come up with some kind of strategic plan of annexation or something else that generate some more revenue or something.
Really?
Yeah, I mean.
We're gonna say yes to it, or we're gonna say no to it? I'm just saying.
Well, remember what Rhonda said earlier, that this plan does not sacrifice any of our other spending at this point. Okay, so,
Normal spending, yeah.
well, so take the budget y'all adopted Thursday night. As this plan is presented to you, theoretically, hopefully, we would still be able to do the same kind of budget, the same sort of capital improvement options and maintenance and needs based on your priorities, without having to necessarily contribute any additional from that budget to this plan.
I mean, honestly, the capital fund, we don't have funded probably at the level that it needs to be funded, but, we did have this to start. But this is something that has kind of developed in a situation over many years of not paying attention to all of those kind of things. So, I don't know that that's a unique 1 year type problem. I think that's just a commitment that, this council and future council need to be making, that we just need to take care of those things. And I get, there's a big pool of things that we're gonna need over time. Hopefully our revenue will increase accordingly, for that.
And that's just like one of the next, like industrial, commercial, annexation.
So, quick question from a real estate and construction folks. What's a typical lease rate for office space like the police and fire? What would be a typical lease rate?
Lease for them to lease.
Yeah, well, what would be a
At
typical?
what
lease
class A, but where do you?
Well, this facility, if we were leasing this facility per square foot, you have 92,000 square feet. And what's your typical lease rate? We're at $3.2 million. This is $34.78 per square foot.
$20, $25 per square foot.
Yeah, that's for 30,
Per square foot per year,
Not 30.
and we retain ownership at the end of this. And I know that doesn't include insurance, that doesn't include other things, but it's not far off.
I don't get
Well,
what your, what
I mean,
is
the
your
30 year
thought?
would be, I think the $30 number she got would be like a triple that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, based on that.
From a litmus test standpoint, we're in the ballpark.
Sure.
And we're gonna own it.
Well,
I'm
and
sorry,
it's very
I'm not following
specialized for our needs too.
Yeah.
Finding something like that.
Are you, you saying if we, wait, I see,
If we have to
now,
use it,
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a litmus test of
Right, right.
hey, where this dollar figure is based on the square footage, based on what type of item it is. And that, there's specialty items that are part of the fire station, especially items part of the police
Right.
station. It wouldn't be in a normal
But all of our estimates include totally updated estimates, everything.
Yes.
And if you didn't have that concentrated portion of debt that's in that 17 years, you'd be really close to that 25.
Yeah, I took the 3.2 million,
Yeah.
which is the high.
What I heard y'all saying, when we were talking about the money that would be set aside for this earmark for this payment every year, it wasn't taking all of the back fee, it wasn't taking 100% of the hospitality tax fee, it wasn't taking, it was taking a portion of each one to make this debt payment every year. So still have the rest of those funds to continue to operate, like normal operate on a year basis with your much appreciated, conservative estimates on annual revenue.
It does take all of accommodations, right?
No, just
This is,
I mean,
this is a gumbo of revenues.
and the way I understand it, David, Theo, is that basically each year, we would review this and analyze and decide what pieces of all those revenues, like a seesaw, that we use to fund this, debt. Is that correct, David?
That's correct.
We could use more fund balance this year to make the jump, you know? Yeah.
That's correct.
And typically we run a surplus in the year. Typically speaking.
Not the whole wood.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Any other comments, discussion? Good.
Just one quick question. Up until the first reading of the bond ordinances in September, does council need to take any formal actions up until then? For these preliminary,
No, Theo, unless you think otherwise.
Sometimes when the thing is gonna be in development for a couple of months, we ask the council to adopt a resolution that says the project staff can hire attorneys, financial advisors, and underwriter to begin work. This is also council approved, an official nod. And everybody in this business works to get paid at closing. So it's not a financial obligation. We'll get a turkey from it.
so July would be all right for that resolution. I just saw Mr. Missouri making a note, so.
Thanks for asking.
I really appreciate David, you and Theo, you're certainly the subject matter experts, and we depend on y'all greatly to guide us through this process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Look forward to working with y'all.
All right, item 4 on the agenda. Second. Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.